Hey book lovers, I'm author Rachel Valancourt. I want to share a little of the story behind the story on how I came to write my debut novel, Every Night Has a Dawn. So back in 2017, my world was rocked by two events that led to me writing this novel right here. The first, my amazing 90-year-old grandmother suffered a heart attack. Now, picture the strongest, feistiest, most fun 5'2" grandmother that you can imagine, who is full of stories, full of life, and she's in the hospital fighting for her life. Grandma June did fight, and she came back, and I think she knew that her days were numbered. I was able to go over there weekly, spend time with her, take her dinner. She had started to forget how to do things, but other than that, mentally, she was still strong. She just couldn't drive anymore, and she didn't want to be alone. Other than that, she was still the funny, feisty Grandma June I'd always known. One day when I went over to visit Grandma and bring her dinner, she came out with her cane in hand and pointed up to her closet and said, "I want you to get that box down over in the corner. I have something for you." And so I went over and I got the box down and we started going through it. And it was a treasure trove. And I grew up living right across the street from her, and her stories of Nia Bay, growing up on the reservation, meeting President Roosevelt. She lived a life. Her mother was born at a time when women didn't even have the vote. So she saw a lot in the 90 years that she lived. When she came to me with that box, she said, "I want you to write my life story." She had been working on this book, gathering her photographs and her memories and her journals together. And so she gave it over to me. I went through everything. I wrote everything down, exactly how she had laid it out, and I was able to read the first 2 chapters to her before she passed away. And after she passed away, I thought, I want to continue, I want to finish this for her. I told her I would do it. And so now that she was gone, she was the youngest in her family. There wasn't a lot of people around left to ask or verify, or sometimes there was like holes in the story. I turned this book into a fictionalized version of her life. So I tried to stay true to her life story and her notes and journals and photographs. But there were times I had to use my imagination of what was the most likely way they got from point A to point B. But I've left one thing out, the other bombshell. So this came about 4 months after my grandmother had her heart attack. It was the night before Thanksgiving, and my husband had bought me a DNA kit for my birthday in September. And I had a strange message on the DNA site. And I thought, oh, that's weird. You know, that's in Pomona, where my mother's born. And this person's coming up as a close relative of mine. So yes, I had a DNA surprise. It involved my mother and it involved my grandmother June. And I don't want to go too deep into it because I want to leave it for you as a surprise when you're reading the book. But so this is a little bit of a spoiler alert. There is a DNA surprise, and there's lost and found family within this book. Grandma June was alive and on hospice when we discovered this DNA surprise. And she hadn't been in the best health, so my mother and I did talk to her about it, and she shared a little bit, but we didn't want to upset her or delve too much into it when her health wasn't very good. So eventually, a few months later, she passed away, and it left my mother and I with just a lot of questions. We met the other family members. I decided it was very interesting and that it was a big part of what made my grandmother the strong, amazing, family-oriented woman that she was, the survivor that she was, and she taught me so much. So I kind of had to piece together again what I thought happened. Based on the information given to me by my research and other family members and family secrets and whispers and all the things, I was able to come up with a fictionalized version, and it's just really a love letter to my grandmother June and to the state of Washington and to women. So this is part 1 of the trilogy, and Twilight's Hidden Truth is part 2. So this is inspired by my mother, and once I finished writing my grandmother's fictionalized version of her life. Once I wrote that book, I just couldn't stop. I always loved writing. I had a mom blog back starting in 2010, and I studied journalism growing up, and I've just always loved the written word, storytelling, epic movies, and I thought there was just something beautiful in this story of my grandmother's life, following on to some of the things that my mother went through, and how things and choices we make in our lives, they kind of impact those that come after us. So the second novel is called Twilight's Hidden Truth, and there's a lot of inspiration, a lot of my mother in this person. I'm gonna put a disclaimer here that this isn't 100% true of her life story, but there are certain events that are definitely inspired by her and things that I think a lot of women will relate to. So it's very interesting. It's kind of a cross between The Outsiders and like a Daisy Jones set in the 70s and 80s. It was just a ton of fun to write. I love that era. It's a real story, and I think a lot of people are relating to it and loving it. Now I have a third novel coming out in November, and it's following on with stories from my own life. And it's a fictionalized version of my husband and my love story, how we met. He's from England and I'm from California, and I'm a former flight attendant and travel agent. I've traveled and lived in other countries. I lived in Australia, I lived in England, and I've just always wanted to get out there and see the world. And I have a lot of stories to tell from my time traveling around the world. I hope you'll check out my trilogy. I have a prequel planned, and it involves an ancestor of ours who was kidnapped by Native Americans, which is a true story. And it kind of, that story inspired the writer who wrote The Last of the Mohicans, but it's more from the woman's perspective. So if you like this kind of woman historical drama, there's a lot of accuracy, but it focuses more on the women and how they're reacting to the times rather than the historical side. So they're very heavy on nostalgia. I would say similar to Where the Crawdads Sing, you know, in that kind of vein, in that kind of genre. The Notebook, you know, there's a lot of romance. There's 4 love stories. But it's not the focus. The focus is the journey of the women